This is Matt at LSAT Lab, and today's topic is on the humanities topic within the reading comprehension section. You're guaranteed to see a passage that's in the humanities topic, and so this is an important one for you to make sure that you're comfortable with. Inside of reading comprehension, 25% of all passages belong to the humanities topic, meaning these passages are ones that you can recognize when you start seeing certain kinds of subjects, such as passages about authors or artists, musicians, and artistic movements. So these passages are about the liberal arts and various important people and movements within them. So the reading comprehension process, let's just cover that one more time. First thing you want to do is make sure that you're actively reading the passage. And what we mean by that is that first you're reading the passage and that you're connecting to the information, meaning that you're understanding it in a way that you can personalize in any way. Some way you want to try to connect yourself to that information, whether it's a familiar topic or whether there's some kind of an analogous relationship that you're familiar with. But you want to try to connect with that information to increase your retention of the information. And you also want to be anticipating where the passage is likely to go. This will keep you actively engaged in the reading process and hopefully forestall any possibility that you might tune out for a few lines and then have to go back and reread a paragraph in order to catch up on what you somehow missed. After that, you want to make sure that you identify the main point of the passage, conduct a passage map, meaning understand how each of the paragraphs relates or serves a role in relation to that main point, and then attack the questions. So the first step, actively reading. I want you to practice that as I give you a passage here. So this passage, we'll do one passage and the questions associated with it. It's from Prep Test 56, passage 1, if you want to go get a copy of it. Otherwise, you can read it right here on the screen. And pause the recording, read this passage, and then we'll come back and have a little discussion. Great. Welcome back. So first things first, we need to make sure that we identify the main point of this passage. So what's the main point? Well, at the end of the first paragraph, we see with this transition point, however, to estimate properly Tutola's rightful position in world literature, it is essential to be clear about the genre in which he wrote. The author later goes on to say that Tutola is not a novelist, but a teller of folktales. And that's the primary drive that the author is trying to convey to us. That in order to understand Tutola's rightful position in the world of literature, we need to understand that he's not a novelist, but rather a teller of folktales. Then we want to conduct a passage map, making sure that we understand the purpose of each paragraph in service of the author's main point. So in the first paragraph, the author is introducing a debate about Amos Tutola. The debate that critics are suggesting, well, there's some critics who are praising Tutola, and there are some critics who are criticizing Tutola as something less than a novelist. Then at the end of the first paragraph, we get the author's main point. The second paragraph goes on to contrast novels and folktales in order to provide distinctions between those categories. In the third paragraph, the author talks about the tradition of folktales, gives us more information about what that tradition looks like. And in the final paragraph, the author talks about how Tutola's work fits within that tradition of folktales. With that passage map, we're ready to answer the questions. So, question 1, which is a main point question. Go ahead and pause the recording, try this question on your own, and when you're done, hit play and we'll come back and try this one together. Well, hopefully you didn't find it too challenging. So it's important to remember that when you're on a main point question, since you've already gone to the work to identify the author's conclusion, you probably want to revisit that information, right? The main point here is that to estimate properly Tutola's rightful position in world literature, it is essential to be clear about the genre in which he wrote. And let's be clear, Tutola is not a novelist, but rather a teller of folktales. So if we have that information, it should make answering this question a little bit easier. And so we just work through the choices one at a time. The first one says, Amos Tutola is an internationally acclaimed writer of folktales whose unique writing style blends together aspects of Yoruba, Nigerian English, and Standard English. Now, this information sounds somewhat familiar, and I may have a hard time eliminating answer choice A on my first pass, so it's okay to hold on to answer choices if you're not sure. Answer choice B. Amos Tutuolo's literary works should be evaluated not as novels, but as unique and inventively crafted retellings of folktales. Now, this sounds pretty good, but I haven't quite eliminated answer choice A, so I'm going to hold on to B and keep moving through the choices, seeing if I can get rid of as many as I possibly can on that first pass. Answer choice C. Amos Tutuolo is an important author because he is able to incorporate the traditions of oral art form into his novels. Well, the author is clearly saying that Tutuola is not a novelist. So to call his works novels is contradicting the passage. So we can eliminate answer choice C. Answer choice D. Critics are divided as to whether Amos Tutuolo's literary works should be regarded as novels or folktales. This is true, but this isn't really the main point. The author isn't talking about the debate really so much as how to go about properly evaluating Tutuolo's works. So this may be true, but it's too narrow to be the main point. Or let's see here, contradiction. My bad. The critics are divided as to whether Amos Tutuolo's literary works should be regarded as novels or folktales. Actually, the critics, now that I think about it, the critics were suggesting that they're not really good novels. So it's not that they're divided. The author is actually suggesting a different way of looking at it. Answer choice E says the folktale is a valuable African literary genre that finds singular expression in the works of Amos Tutuola. Well, that term singular, it was mentioned in the last paragraph. But this is really strong to say that the folktale is a valuable African literary genre that finds singular expression. Amos Tutuola may be an example of a teller of folktales, but to say that it finds singular expression in the works of Amos Tutuolo, this doesn't even talk about whether or how we're going to evaluate Amos Tutuolo's works. This is more about the folktale itself. So this is too strong, placing Amos Tutuolo as too important within the African literary genre of folktales. So let's go back and take a look at A and B again. A is actually too narrow. It may be true, but it's not what the author is trying to assert. So while Amos Tutuolo's works are correctly described in answer choice A, that's not the purpose of why we're here. The purpose is to figure out how to evaluate Amos Tutuolo's works. Answer choice B gets at that and is the right answer. And we can see that restated in the main idea. So lines 9 to 15 and 20 to 21, you could use to support answer choice B. And I think that's a really important process to take here, where not only are you trying to make sure that you understand where in the passage the right answer comes from, but also the kind of incorrectness each wrong answer choice possesses. This may not be something that you do during the middle of the section or the test, but you would want to conduct this kind of work in your review in order to make sure you fully understand why the right answer is right, where does it come from, and what kind of incorrectness each of the wrong answer choices has, because the better you get at, the stronger you are at describing the type of incorrectness in an abstract way that can be applied to many wrong answer choices as opposed to just this wrong answer choice, it'll help you see that issue as it arises in future answer choices. So let's look at question number 2. Again, pause the recording, try this question on your own, hit play again when you're ready to get started. All right, welcome back. Tutuolo's approach to writing folktales would be most clearly exemplified by a modern-day Irish author who... So what we're looking for is somebody else who has similar characteristics to Tutuolo's works. Answer choice A says, applied conventions of the modern novel to the retelling of Irish folktales. So this answer choice contradicts the passage, right? The Tutuolo is not applying modern conventions of novels. In fact, it's questionable as to whether Tutuolo's work is even should be even considered a novelist. Tutuolo, the author, is suggesting that Tutuolo is not writing novels, but rather retelling folk tales. So applying those conventions is not something that Tutuolo does. In fact, he innovates on some people described it as inventive approaches to novels, not the conventions of a modern novel. Answer choice B, recreated important elements of the Irish literary style within a purely oral art form. Well, okay, so possibly Tutolo was recreating his traditional folk tales. So maybe we want to hold on to this one and just can keep going through. We're looking to get rid of the clearly wrong answer choices so we can come back and evaluate the contenders. Answer choice C, combine characters from English and Irish folktales to tell a story of modern life. Combining characters from each of the two genres. The passage doesn't suggest that Tutolo was combining characters from both traditional like folktale stories and modern characters. The author was Tutolo was essentially retelling these common stories, these common folk tales. So this combination of characters is just simply not supported by the passage. D says transplanted traditional Irish folk tales from their original setting to contemporary Irish life. That sounds kind of familiar. Towards the last paragraph, as I was talking about Tutolo's works and how they fit into the genre of a folk tale, I think I remember hearing something about transferring these traditional folk tales into a modern setting. So without going back into the passage to confirm it, you probably just want to hold on to it and then take a look at answer choice E. E says utilized an omniscient narrator in telling original stories about contemporary Irish life. Now, there was an omniscient narrator, but that was at the end. And for sure, these stories weren't original. Right? The stories that Tutolo is telling are ones that belong to the culture. These are traditional folk tales, and so by saying original stories, that actually contradicts the passage. So if we go back and take a look at answer choices B and D, one thing we might do is just, if we had a recollection about answer choice D, go back into the passage to see if we can confirm it. There it is in line 45 to 47, and he embellishes familiar tales with personal interpretations or by transferring them to modern settings. So that supports answer choice D. We find that support lines 45 to 47. And if we go back and think about answer choice B, recreated important elements of the Irish literary style. This is actually kind of similar to answer choice A in talking about the literary style. The Tutolo is not recreating elements. Tutolo is improvising. And so we might say the answer choice B contradicts the passage. Answer choice D is correct. Let's try another one. Question 3. Pause the recording. Try this one on your own. Hit play and come back and we'll have a conversation. All right, so what do you think? Which one of the following most accurately characterizes the author's attitude toward Tutolo's position in world literature? The author is pretty convinced that Tutolo is a teller of folk tales as opposed to a novelist. But let's take a quick look at the answer choices. Answer choice A says, convinced that Tutolo's works should be viewed within the context of the African oral tradition. That sounds pretty familiar. That sounds right. We might just hold on to it and see if we can get rid of the rest of the answer choices. Answer choice B says, certain that Tutolo's works will generate a renewed interest in the study of oral traditions. That's unsupported. That information, that renewed interest in the study of oral traditions was not mentioned in the passage. So that's unsupported. Answer choice C says, pleased at the reception that Tutolo's works have received from literary critics. In fact, it's the opposite. The author's pretty sure that those critics have it wrong. So you'd say contradiction. Answer choice D, confident that the original integrity of Tutolo's works will be preserved despite numerous translations. These translations weren't mentioned in the passage. That's unsupported. Answer choice E, optimistic that Tutolo's works reflect what will become a growing new trend in literature. That's a speculative claim. The author doesn't discuss about a possible new trend in literature coming from Tutolo's works. So that's simply speculation. And that leaves us more confident in our answer choice with A, and we can find the support for this in lines 27 to 29. The most useful approach to Tutolo's works then is one that regards him as working within the African oral tradition. So lines 27 to 29 support answer choice A. Okay, let's try question 4. Pause the recording, try this on your own, and come back and I'll walk you through it. Welcome back. So according to the passage, some critics have criticized Tutolo's work on the ground that A, his literary works do not exhibit enough similarities to the African oral tradition from which they are drawn. In fact, that seems to be the opposite. Well, no, wait a minute. According to the passage, some critics have criticized Tutolo's works. So we're thinking about what are the critics suggesting? His literary works do not exhibit enough similarities to the African oral tradition. And, this is actually got it misplaced a little bit. His literary works do not exhibit enough similarities to the novel. That's the criticism that the critics have, right? So this is unsupported. Answer choice B. His mixture of languages is not entirely effective as a vehicle for either traditional folktales or contemporary novels. The criticism was that Tutolo's works aren't really good novels, but to say that it's not effective for folktales isn't supported in the passage. Answer choice C. His attempts to fuse elements of traditional storytelling style with the format of the novel is detrimental to his artistic purposes. So, detrimental to his artistic purposes sounds okay. You might hold on to this one, not sure. And let's see if we can get rid of the clearly wrong answer choices and come back and take a closer look at the ones that are close. Answer choice D. His writing borrows substantially from well-known storylines and at the same time alters their details. So this one sounds okay. Sounds familiar. Might hold on to answer choice D as well. Answer choice E. His unique works are not actually novels, even though he characterizes them as such. Well, I don't recall Tutolo ever suggesting that his works were novels. This is simply unsupported. So let's take a closer look at C and D. Now, if we see either of these something in either of these choices that we might want to go test, or we might know where it is based off of the passage map, we can go do so. And if we look at answer choice D, we can find it supported in the words others, however, dismissed. This is the criticism of this is the critics. Others, however, have dismissed his works as simple retellings of local tales, full of unwelcome liberties taken with the details of the well-known storylines. So that's supporting answer choice D. His writing borrows substantially from well-known storylines and at the same time alters their details. Lines 8 to 11 supports answer choice D. Answer choice C, his attempt to fuse elements of traditional storytelling style with the format of the novel. We don't actually know that he attempted to fuse folktales with the novel. In fact, it's more like the author is suggesting that Tutolo is more of a teller of folktales than of a novelist. This blending aspect is unsupported by the passage. Great, so let's try another question. Question 5. Pause the recording, come back when you're ready. So this question, the author attributes each of the following to Tutolo except. So 4 of these will be mentioned as a characteristic of Tutolo's works, and the one that isn't is going to be our answer. We should try to move the choices using our recollection to eliminate as many of them as possible. And if there's a close call between 2 or 3 of the choices, we can go back and confirm that in the passage. So A says repetition of elements in his stories for emphasis. I believe I recall hearing something about the repetition of elements, but I'm not positive. In lines 44 to 45, it does actually tell us that, though. B, relocation of traditional stories to modern settings. We already confirmed that characteristic. Attainment of international recognition. That was actually something that was mentioned very early on in the beginning, but that was actually mentioned. Use of an omniscient narrator in his works. That sounds like what we heard at the very end of the passage. Transformation of Yoruba folktales into modern novels. Well, remember, the author doesn't call these works novels. So by saying that Tutolo transformed them into novels goes beyond what the passage would support. It's contradicting. The author does not believe that they're novels. Question 6. Pause the recording, try it on your own, and come back when you're ready. So this one says the author refers to the corpus of traditional lore, lines 26 to 27, as part of an attempt to. Now, on a question like this, people are often tempted to go back into the passage and to start to read the text around lines 26 to 27 for the the specific reference of words, and to see how those words are being placed. But if you did a good passage map, it's more about the purpose of the paragraph than it is about the purpose of that language. And in that paragraph, but it is important to bear in mind, whereas realism and originality are expected of the novel, the teller of folk tales is expected to derive subjects and frameworks from the corpus of traditional lore. This paragraph really is about contrasting novels with folktales in order for the author to go on to suggest that Tutolo is not a novelist, but rather a teller of folktales. So if you've got that, the purpose of that paragraph, distinguish expectations that apply to one literary genre from those that apply to another literary genre. That's exactly what the author is doing in the second paragraph there. Answer choice B, argue that two sharply differing literary genres are both equally valuable. To argue that they're equally there was no argument about their value. Answer choice B is unsupported. C, challenge critics who ascribe little merit to innovative ways of blending two distinct literary genres. Well, we're not really sure that Tutolo was actually blending two distinct literary genres. The author is suggesting that Tutolo was a teller of folktales. The challenged critics, the author does challenge critics. That is a purpose of the passage, but it's not necessarily a purpose of that particular paragraph. And about the merit to innovative ways of blending, we're not really sure that Tutolo was blending two distinct literary genres. So that's simply unsupported. D says elucidate, which is a nice funny word. To show those characteristics of one literary genre that have direct counterparts in another, largely dissimilar genre. So answer choice D is talking about finding similarities, which is the exact opposite of what's happening in this place in the passage. The author is driving a distinction between the two genres, as opposed to looking for similarities at that point. That's contradicting the passage. Answer choice E, argue for a new, more precise analysis of two literary genres whose distinguishing characteristics are poorly understood. In fact, the author is not suggesting that their characteristics are poorly understood. The author is actually trying to identify those characteristics and present them so that these critics can be informed so that they don't evaluate him as a novelist. So this simply contradicts the passage. And answer choice A is the right answer. One more question. Question 7 here. Give this one a try on your own and come back when you're ready. So here's another purpose question, but this purpose question isn't the purpose of a paragraph or a particular line reference. This is the purpose of the passage as a whole. The author's purpose is to essentially establish a new basis for evaluating Tutolo's works, not as a novelist, but rather as a teller of folktales. Let's take a look at the answer choices. A says, illustrate the wide range of Tutolo's body of work. A wide range. There were some characteristics that were described, but the author never described his range as wide. So that's simply unsupported. Answer choice B, explain the significance of the literary genre of the folktale and to defend it as a valid art form. There was no criticism of the folktale no one was calling the folktale an invalid art form. The author's not defending folktales, but rather trying to distinguish folktales from novels. So that's simply playing the wrong role. C says, provide an account of Tutolo's body of work in order to help establish appropriate criteria for its evaluation. Remember, the author's main point was to say that in order to evaluate Tutolo's work, we need to understand that he's more of a teller of folktales than a novelist, right? So appropriate criteria for an evaluation of its work, that is supported by those same lines that establish the main point. Answer choice D, distinguish accurately between the genre of the novel and that of the folktale. Well, that does happen, but that's the purpose of the second paragraph. That's not the purpose of the passage as a whole. So it's too narrow. Answer choice E, summarize the disagreement among critics regarding Tutolo's place in world literature. There was a disagreement. Again, that's the purpose of the first paragraph, but again, not the purpose of the passage as a whole. So too narrow again. So in summary, let's just take a look at the process. We want to make sure that for every reading comprehension passage, you're following this process. You want to make sure that you're actively reading the passage, finding the main point, creating a passage map, and then moving on to answering the questions. The common subjects within the humanities topic are authors, artists, musicians, and artistic movements. And the important tramp answers you want to be on the lookout for when you're working through wrong answers in reading comprehension are answers that are either out of scope or contradicting the information, maybe presenting information that was discussed but in a way that isn't directly supported in the passage. So taking the same words out of the passage and rearranging them such that the meaning is now different. Answer choices that describe the wrong role, particularly on purpose questions. Answer choices that are too narrow, either on purpose or on main point questions. Or answer choices that are too strong, particularly on inference questions or most supported questions. So that's it for the humanities topic, and we'll see you next time.